afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
It's rounding 2:30, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to our 10th segment in our webinar series, Working with Grids. Today we'll be talking about Saurian and some updates that have changed how you'll interact with the screens in there, specifically how you'll interact with tables and table-like elements. So presenting with us today is Kelly Blackman, our EMUE product manager. And I will be taking any questions and working behind the scenes to support Kelly. My name is Mike Harris. I'm Senior Operations Manager and Consultant. And just to go over a couple of things that'll help us through the call today. To begin with, I will be muting everyone across the board. If you have a question, though, there is a chat window here. So everyone will be muted to start. Next, if you're having any webinar difficulties, send me a chat, and there's a chat window in the left-hand side of your GoToMeeting screen there, just on the bottom. You can write a message in there. I'll be monitoring that during the call, or you can email me at mharris@databound.com. Next, for questions and answers, we'll be keeping all the questions till the end of the webinar, but you can also ask questions during the webinar in the chat window, and I will try and answer those. If there's something great that I think everyone should hear, I might hold those back, though, and answer them at the end, have Kelly answer them for you. Lastly, PowerPoints and scripts in the video will be available shortly after the webinar today or tomorrow early at our website and the EMUE ACE webinars page. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Kelly and let him present. Kelly has been working really diligently with our development team to get these new changes implemented, and there's some exciting changes that he's going to share for you. So Kelly, let me turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. And thanks everybody for joining. We got a really great group signed up today. I think we had somewhere around the neighborhood of 50 to 60 folks sign up. So I know there's definitely some material here that I think is worth sharing with everybody with all the changes that are coming on with Saurian. So just to continue through Mike's presentation here, and we're going to talk about grids. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the changes that are coming in Saurian, particularly 4.2.200. There's already been some changes that have taken place in some of the earlier versions, like 4.2.100, as early as Service Pack 1. So we're going to go through talking about what the grids are, and what they mean, what they look like, and how they affect 4.2.200 and some of the versions that I had just mentioned before. And what we've done as far as EMUE goes to address the new changes. We've developed a few new commands, which we're going to go over and show several examples of, and hopefully get you familiar enough to be prepared for what's coming. And so we'll look at it, a little screenshot here in the presentation, then I'll actually go through and show how they work in EMUE itself. Okay, so first off, what is a grid? We've got a definition there. Essentially, what's happening is Cerner is replacing some of the structures that they have used for a long time, at least the tables. If you're familiar with some of the scripting and some of the element strings, you'll know that there's a lot of data tables in there, things that are like work lists, for example. There's a lot of table element types that are being used there, and so all that stuff is being converted really to accommodate HTML5 and to get ready for Edge compliancy or Edge support for the new browser. So this is kind of the way it would look before. The old way, you might see something that there's a table there and it has rows and cells inside of it, and it would have an ID of something like data table, where now we're seeing something on the right hand side that is, they're all divs. So you've probably seen divs before in working in scripting with Saurian as well, but these have a little more structure to them. They have certain properties that that make them easier to work with for us, and so you'll see some things like a work list, CTL work list, or you'll see row 1, and you'll see inside of the rows there are what we call grid cells, and we'll get into what this means and what it looks like as far as scripts are concerned. But so there's several layers to it, but it has a similar kind of structure, if you will. There's a parent that has the main work list, and then there's rows and there's cells inside of it. So there's some similarity there that you'll be used to. So we'll get to that in a second. So really, what are the differences? Tables versus grids. Here's a listing of some of the things we included in the presentation. Tables have other HTML elements inside of them. Grids are basically comprised of all div sections that have specific roles and classes that are assigned to them. Tables, not really good at being utilized on mobile devices or things that support HTML5, where grids can have that functionality there. Being that tables are really unique, they're really easy to separate out, and with a grid, they're, like we said before, they're a collection of divs all put together, and so they're a little bit difficult to navigate. So there's a little bit of difference there, and then some other things there as well. And as I mentioned before, the edge support is one of the big things that's driving all this as far as the UI goes. And I will bring up one concern too. I know we've had some conversations, and maybe you have heard in some of your findings about 42200. It is supported in the Edge browser, but it is not required to have the Edge browser to run 42200. Just say that again. You don't have to have Microsoft Edge to run Saurian 42200. It will work in it, but as long as IE11 is being supported by Microsoft, the versions of Saurian Financials will also be supported in Internet Explorer 11 as well. So I want to make sure that is clear. We've had some questions come up about that and whether or not EMUE is going to be able to support Edge, and that's not on our near-term roadmap, but we do want to be able to do that in the near future. But right now, there's no risk of losing the scripting abilities that we have in Internet Explorer, so it's not as high priority for us at the moment. So what does a grid look like? I wanted to get back to this. This is a familiar work list for you. It's a charge error work list, and it looks looks kind of like it used to. You'll see that there are checkboxes there, and there's links over on the right-hand side, and you got the paging like you had before. So it looks the same, but it doesn't behave the same. And so we'll see that in just a minute. You actually see some performance increases, I think, from using the new commands versus what we had with the table. So that's one of the bonuses that actually came out of this. So what we did in EMUE to handle this, we added 3 new commands, which we'll go through in detail in a second. But the first one is click WebGrid cell. And that is actually going to do, what it says it's going to do. We're going to find a cell in a grid, and we're going to click on it. In most cases, that's the actions that we want to take. We're going to add another one called find WebGrid row. And we also added a GetWebGrid command, which is very similar to GetWebTable. And before, we could extract the table contents out of Saurian and put it into a list in EMUE. And GetWebGrid is going to do the same thing. But we did want to separate things out just to make it less confusing for our users. So anything that's dealing with the grids is going to have the word grid in the command, and anything else that you were used to using before will still work as long as those elements are still there. So I'm talking about the tables. If the tables are still there, then GetWebTable will still work, but if it's converted over to a grid, then we'll have to go with GetWebGrid. So we wanted to make a clear separation in how that worked. The second point there is we added some support for the command getWebElement from container. One of the most common ways people used EMUE is to extract a list out, and then they kind of iterated through the list itself, and getWebElement from container was one of the methods that we used to do that in class. And so we'll go over what that looks like too. It's a little bit of a more challenging command, so we'll step through that one in detail. And then the third bullet point there, we added the ability to lock in the web script builder on an element type called grid. Before, whenever we use the web script builder to identify something, we would lock on a table, and it would filter out everything except tables on the screen. So we did the same thing again in order to kind of translate what we used to do to what we're currently supporting. It'll easily allow you to identify the grids, even though it's a div section. We're calling it a grid because that's what they're referred to, and it's going to be easier for you to find that way. So again, we'll take a look at that here in just a second. So here are the commands. GetWebGrid, I just mentioned, is used to get the data from a website that uses the grid structures instead of the tables. Works like GetWebTable. It's pretty much a replacement for that in Saurian. Again, you'll see some faster processing. Sometimes it took several seconds in order to iterate through the HTML. And in this case, we're actually using some of the internal APIs that Saurian offers. So one of the big changes in the way we're doing this is we've gotten a really tighter partnership with Cerner on this, and they have given us some information that has allowed us to be able to optimize how some of these things work and be able to work much faster and more reliably going forward as well. So you'll see some performance increase here, and the data is retrieved from the grid and put into a list. And this is what the syntax looks like. Again, very similar to really the only thing that changed here is instead of grid, it says table, or instead of table, it says grid, GetWebGrid. We have a list name you provided, and then you provide the element string for the grid that you want to work with, and then it reads that information. Okay, the element identifier can take the string like we always have. You can always also do smart names. We're in the process of updating our smart names to support the grids that are there as well. So it'll take either one of those as far as an identifier. Click WebGrid Cell allows you to search the grid and click on an appropriate row in the command. And this is kind of the equivalent of Click Web Element. And you can still use Click Web Element in some of these controls, and I'll show you kind of a variety of options that you have available to you. But this really is streamline the whole process of finding something in a table or grid and clicking on it. There's some different behaviors that are associated with the grids and how some things have to be visible, and we'll see that in a little bit. But looking at the syntax here, we're able to search a grid and find the element, and we'll specify a column that we want to click on, and EMUE will click on it and do all of those things really in one command. So here's what the syntax for this one looks like. Click WebGrid Cell, the command name, then you provide the grid element identifier. And then there's this other part here that the next parameter you'll see has these pipe characters in there. And really what those pipe characters represent are the columns that you see in the grid. So in this particular example, if you look at this, this would be column 1, column 2, 3, 4. The search string variable would be searched in column 4. Okay, so this is how we're designating which columns we want to search for or search in. And so we can either do a single piece of text that we want to search for, or we could put information in each 4 of these spaces and say, okay, I want to match on all 4 of these columns. They have to match in order for it to be able to find that particular row. Or you can also do a wildcard search. If you only know a partial piece of the information that you want to click on, you can also use wildcards as that in that search string. And then the last parameter here is the column number that you want to click on. So if you're thinking about it in terms of the structure of the command, it's the command name, it's the grid that I'm looking at. This parameter essentially finds the row you want to click on, and this is the column. Okay, so in the old speak, if you're looking at a table and you want to row 1, column 2, okay, this is finding the row, and this is the column. And here's some more examples of what the syntax looks like. It's pretty much the same, although again, we can just designate that we can do an element string, or a smart name will work as far as the grid goes. Find WebGrid row is very similar to Click WebGrid Cell. The only difference is that we are not we're not clicking on anything, we're not taking any action. This is really giving a confirmation of, can I find something in the grid that I'm looking for? And if I can, it returns a row number that we can use elsewhere. This again can search multiple columns. It returns a row number, so we can pass that row number into another command like GetWebElement from container. This also has the ability to do wildcard searching. So the difference now is that we don't have a column parameter at the end of this particular command, but we have a row variable parameter up here, and that's going to hold the row number if in fact it finds a match on our search string. So if it does not find a match, then the row variable will contain a value of 0. If it finds a match, that value will be the row number on the screen that you see. And again, show you some real concrete examples here in just a minute, but kind of want to set the stage with the syntax and how everything works. Okay, so again, like the other commands, variable name, element identifier can be either a string or a smart name. So here's just a little screenshot. We'll get into it here in just a second, but you can see the grids here in action, and let's take a look at it working in EMUE here. Let me switch over. So I'm going to go through a series of screens here, and again, feel free if you've got questions. I know I've kind of thrown a lot of information at you here, and so feel free to ask questions in the chat, or you can save them till the end, but don't forget them if they do come up along the way. So I'm going to go to the charge error work list. I'm just assigning a couple of variables there, and wait for this to load. So this is an example of the grid, and I'll drag it over just a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. So the first thing we're going to do is we've got a command here that's going to do GetWebGrid. And so right now I don't have any lists in EMUE, and GetWebGrid is going to basically retrieve this information and stuff it into a list. And we're using all smart names here, but I'll show you an example in a minute of one that's an element string and how you use the WebScript builder to identify it. But it's pretty straightforward. This is the smart name page. We're on the charge error work list, and we're trying to retrieve the error grid, and we're going to store it into a list called error list. Okay. And there we have all of our information pretty quick. And it's a representation of exactly what you see on the screen. The only difference is there is not a column for the checkbox. In tables past, you probably would have seen a blank column here that displayed a space for this checkbox, but there is not one in the data here. We're just getting the actual text data that comes back in this particular grid. Okay, if we were going to use the WebScript builder for this, you know, we could come and capture our clicks. Once this loads, I told you before we could come into and lock on an element type, and what we did was add grid as an element type. And so we click on that and click the little lock there, and now when we hover over what we've got on the screen, it's really hard to see, but there's a green outline around this entire thing. If I move off of it, you might see it go away. Okay. We click on that, and you'll see that it comes up with the ID attribute that has a value of CTL work list grid. And so that is the element string for this particular table. And so if you're going to use the WebScript builder to identify something, I fully recommend locking on this type as we did with tables before and finding it that way. This way you can just, you know, build your command, come down and find GetWebGrid, provide your list, okay, just like you had before. Nothing has changed as far as that's concerned. Really, the only thing that's different is the command name itself. Okay, so if I want to move this back over a little bit. And so we've got an example here of something that we want to click on, and we're trying to find a specific row in this list. And right now my variable is charge error date of February 1st, and the patient name is Christina IS test. And so the way this works is we do the click web grid cell, again, the grid that we want to look inside, and then we set up our search string here. And so really what we're doing again is these pipes are separating the columns. First column is the checkbox, second is the initial error date. Okay, so we're continuing to go on until we get to the column that has the charge error date. And so if we look at the screen, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's column 8, and column 9 is the patient name. So if we come right here, that's column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is where we put in our date, and 9 is where we put in our patient name. And then we're saying down here we want to click on column 1 being the checkbox. Okay, so what happens is EMUE looks for this particular match in this row, it finds a match, then it clicks on column 1. If it doesn't find this particular match anywhere on this grid, then you'll get an error that the web grid cannot be found. But it's going to find it here because that one's on the screen. And so it selects it, and that's really all there is to it. Again, you can use the same command to uncheck a box if you want to. It's the same process. You're looking for the same thing. The only thing we're different, we're just clicking the row that we already clicked before. Okay. And the same thing applies if you wanted to click on like a one of these links over here. You know, all you got to do is just change the column to whatever that number is. It happens to be 13 in this case, and so if we wanted to click on the link in that column or in the last column of the grid, then we would just change the column number. We could still search based on the other columns that are in the grid, but we're just changing the one that we actually want to simulate a mouse click on. Okay. So I'm going to move on. There's a couple of other examples I want to go through. We're about halfway through here, so I do want to leave some time at the end. I'm going to go ahead and hit run so that this stuff goes through quickly. And Mike, I see we do have some questions down there, so we can either address them now or come back.
Yep, we can come back to those. Those are good questions.
Okay, so this is an interesting list for a few reasons, or a grid. I guess this is a different setup than the other one. It's the same structure, but as you can see, there's a scroll bar associated with this one, which makes it a little bit more tricky than the other one. And the reason that is because what we learned in dealing with these is that whenever we interact with one of these particular rows, it actually has to be visible on the screen. Okay, so if we wanted to click on the last row or last checkbox in this grid, we would have to somehow scroll all the way down to it and then click on it. And so, you know, before we had this new commands in place, it was a really, really tedious process. It was very, very, very slow because we had to actually simulate clicking on these arrows in order to make it work. And so that was a terrible solution. And so again, these same commands that we just used before are going to work in this scenario as well. But you'll see in this case is that this click web grid cell command is actually going to do the scrolling for you as well as the clicking. So that's another efficiency thing that's built into it. Another thing that improves the reliability of it. So we've assigned a location of Newark and NWC Women's Services as our search criteria. And if you look, we're looking in a grid, the include encounters at grid, and then we're looking in column 2 and column 3 for our match, and we're going to click on column 1. So this should scroll all the way down for us to find the match we're looking for, and then click on it. And you can see this one was almost all the way down at the bottom, but within a matter of less than a second, it was able to search, find a match, scroll, and click the box, really all in the same command here. So that's pretty slick. Again, you can uncheck with the same command. It won't do any scrolling, obviously, because it's in view. So it's just automatically there. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. We'll come back and answer them as we get done with it. So a couple more things I want to walk through here on this same screen. We're just going to close it out and come back into it. Because this is a setup that's going to use the find WebGrid row command and use that in the get web element from container command. So it's a little bit different approach. So this is another example of retrieving the this list. What's interesting about it is we'll see in a minute if we look at the location and provider list. I just pulled this in from the grid and there are 177 rows. Okay. That'll come back here in just a second, which will make an interesting point about. Then you'll see how these these rows have to be visible and how those numbers relate. So I'm going to set my list position to the very last row in the list, and I'm going to read it as if I'm basically working for the last one in the grid here. So I've got an encounter location provider of San Leandro, and my provider is SL Radiology. And what we're going to do again is search for that particular row in the grid. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a row number returned. And what you'll see is that what's supposed to happen here is when we do this command, even though we're not clicking on it, this find WebGrid row is going to make sure that this row is visible to be interacted with. So even though we're not doing anything with it, it's going to take the parameters, look in the grid. If it finds a match, it's going to scroll to that row, make it visible, and it's going to return us the row number in order so we can use it in another command. So we run find WebGrid row. Okay, you'll see that the screen changed over here. We were all the way at the top, and now we're at the very bottom. Okay, here's our match. It is visible. And if we come look at the row variable, it's row 6. Okay, and you might look at that and say, well, it's row 177 in my list that I read, but it's only row 6 whenever I run this command. So what happens is that really the only thing on the screen that you see, or the only thing that you can interact with is what you can see on the screen. So even though this is technically row 177 in the entire list of provider and locations, it's only the 6th one that's visible on the screen. Up here at the very tip top, you can see this row here would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So from the visible perspective, we're looking at row 6, where this one we're looking at 177 total rows. But in order to be able to interact with it, we have to provide the row number that's visible on the screen. So in this case, if we wanted to click on this one, we would have to pass in row 6 and not 177. So this is where find WebGrid row comes in very handy, because it gives us the correct row number that we need, and then we can use that in other places. All right, so get web element from container, and it is a real reliable pattern that we've used before in iterating through lists. So if you were starting at the top and you wanted to click a bunch of these location and providers, you could start at the top and read it and see if it's one you want, and then if it is, retrieve it from the list, click on it, retrieve it from the list, click on it. We do that a lot with checkboxes. Okay, so this command may look very, very familiar to you. We give it a stored web element identifier for what we want to call this element that we're trying to work with. This is what is new here, grid cell. Let me type it out so you can see what it looks like. Get web element from container. Okay, if we hit a space here, you would see these element types before, and we would typically do something like checkbox, or we would do something like div section. Okay, but what we did was create grid cell. Again, trying to make everything consistent with the new setup. So technically it's a div section, but we're calling it a grid cell. So that's really what you need to know. This is the first grid cell in this table. So we do encounters in progress work list dialog dot include encounters at grid. And this parameter right here is the row that we want to pull from, which is the one we got back in the previous command. So we type in the word row, and then we want to click on column 1, which is the checkbox. Or that's the one we want to extract out from column 1. And so we would run this command, and it would get the checkbox from the grid, and then we do the click web element on that particular checkbox right here. Okay. And so click web element will still work with it. You do have to fire the additional mouse events in order to make this command work, but we added that in so that it would also work. Before we made the changes, click web element would not do anything really with these grids. So we had to add the additional events to be fired in there. Okay, so to kind of review a little bit, find a web grid row is taking a search string. If it finds it, it scrolls down to it and returns the row number. If it does not find a match, the row number is 0 that gets returned. Then we can pass that row number into another command like GetWebElement from container, extract it, and click on the element that we pulled from it. So what it looks like if I change, actually we can come down here and look at this. The next section is looking at wildcard searching. We haven't looked at that yet, but if we wanted to add in the ability to do a partial match, we could do that. Okay, in this case, we're looking in the third column for EWC and the wildcard. We don't really care what's after it, but this command will support it. It'll scroll to and find the first one in the encounter provider column that has EWC in it. Okay, same thing happens here. Just to show you a different example, we can do wildcards really in any position that you need to put them in, at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. And find web grid row again, we'll find it and scroll to it, make it visible. Okay, so it scrolled down now. EWC dental recurring is visible in the grid, and then we can do something with it if we want to. So I'm going to pause just a second. That's a lot of talking, and there are a few questions, and I want to give people a chance to ask them, Mike. And then if there aren't any, then maybe we can continue on through the last one and then wrap it up. But I do want to take a moment and see if anybody has questions.
Absolutely. So we had a couple of good ones come in. First one from Jackie Jolly. How do you select the box in the header to select all?
Good question. That we're going to have to do, that one will not work with the click web grid cell. We'll have to use click web element in order to do that. If we wanted to, we'd have to use the web script builder to identify this particular checkbox, but you would just use the regular click web element command. It's not quite as pretty because it's not really contained within the grid, but it does work. So if we did this command here, click web element, you can do it right clicking, just click on them all, but if I click on it, it will uncheck them. So I just anchored on encounter location and then got the div section to the left of it. So you can use the web script builder to do that. Again, it's not quite as pretty and elegant as the other solutions, but you can do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And from Tyler Dater, you said that the checkbox does not come back in the error list, but you're telling it to click the first column. When we're counting, do we include the checkbox in our index?
When we're counting to, so when you're visually looking at the data, you need to include it in the count. So yes, this would be column 1, this will be column 2, this will be column 3 if you are trying to use the click web grid cell. Now returning the data, since there's no data in there, it does come back as no column. So if I'm looking at the provider and location, there are only 2 here. So I get it's a good question. There is a little bit of inconsistency. I tried to point out earlier, I don't know if you caught it, but you typically in the past when you had tables like this, there would probably be a blank column in front of all these locations and providers. That doesn't happen with the new setup. So, but in order for, I thought it would be really difficult from a user standpoint if I was trying to tell you to search in column 1 and 2 if you're looking at the screen, and then column 1 you see a checkbox. So I wanted to make sure that if you're trying to find something in column 2, you put it in the second position. So I thought that was more important. Hopefully that makes sense.
Excellent. That's all the questions we have from chat.
Okay. All right. One last one I'll do, and then we can wrap it up. So this is another one that came to us. Again, some of these changes are already in 4.2.100 in some versions of it. So at least in early service pack 1, and that's actually the system that I'm working on right now. And so you will see some of this if you're already on some of these versions, if you're hitting some of the screens that we're talking about here. So I'm just getting to the location right now. This is another one on the search person and patient dialogue. So if you go to add revised person, or you go to merge persons or something like that, and you bring up the search person dialogue, then this one is already formatted as far as the new grid goes. You can kind of tell that by looking at the outline on some of these things. They look really different. But anyway, another example of here, this one's looking at the phone number. Okay, so we can search different areas. This one happens to be looking for the phone number. The next one's going to look at the patient name. The third one's going to look at the social security number. So different kind of setup, and you can click on column 1. You can click on column 7 if you want to click on the actual patient name. So a lot of the same stuff we've seen before, just kind of a different variation. I wanted to make sure that we covered as much as we could in detail. So this one found the phone number, clicked on column 1. This one's going to look for the patient name and click on column 1 as well. So this one should click on the third row. Okay. And then the other problem that we discovered was that we didn't have a way to click on these links before. But we've been able to solve that one too and get around the ability or the inability of being able to click on those. So in this case, we're going to click on the actual patient name here, and it's going to bring up the other dialogue that comes up here about the patient information. Okay, so that's the different variations. And the other thing that's important is if you were to sort these things for some reason and you wanted to still click on the one with, this one right here, it still knows that you need to click on this one up here. So it's still going to be able to find the right one regardless of how you sort the columns. So changing the order of what's displayed on the screen, the commands will still work and find the right one depending on the search criteria. And one thing I will point out as a last note on this is that you'll notice that I'm not putting any column delimiters after this. And you don't have to. If there are 30 columns on the screen and you only want to search up to column 5, then you only have to put in enough pipes in order to get you to that particular column. You don't have to fill out the whole search string with with pipes all the way just to make it even. So even though we're not searching for anything with address and anything after the name here, so we just left those pipes off and it's not required. Okay. That's really what I wanted to show you. We've got some really other cool stuff that's coming up, but I think this is going to be hopefully beneficial to everyone here. So let me flip back over to here, and I'll turn it back over to Mike, and we can open it up for questions if there are any that anybody wants to ask.
Excellent. So thank you very much for presenting that, Kelly. We did have a question come in. Will replay of this be available? Yes, it will. Absolutely. We'll be putting this up on our website. What other questions are out there about our new commands or the new processes? Anything like that?
Kelly, this is Will Kleinfelder.
Hey, Will.
On that last one, Do you really have to do the search, or I can just click on row 7
Um,
or column 7, I should say, because
if
I'll do a search, I guess, because I'll verify that the row is 100%. But then I just want to click on. I always want to click on name, so I would just click on 7. I don't care what's in. I don't care what the name is.
you can click web element
Okay.
will still work. So if you know you're always going to get one row, and you always want to click on that particular link or that particular cell, then you can put that in there. And yeah, frankly, you could just probably put in a wildcard here, and if you don't really care what the value is, you could do something like that and just click on row 7.
Okay.
And
I'll
that would
test
probably,
it out.
yeah, that would probably do it too. So it doesn't really care what's in the cell. It'll just find whatever's on the first row and pop them. Yeah, so that worked too. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
Excellent. Great question. Thank you, Will. We've got another couple questions, Kelly. First, from Petra. How is this handled if multiple are found, and what will happen if none are found?
Good question. So if multiples are found with your criteria search, then the first one that it encounters is the one that will be found. So it's a great point to make sure that you've got enough unique identifiers in your search string in order to find the row that you want. If you do not find a match, in this case, you will get an error. So if I change this number to 251 or something like that, and then I try to run it, EMUE is going to go through and try to find it. It won't find that particular row, so it'll pop up an error message that says it can't find the WebGrid row. And so you'll have to, typical error handling that you would want to have in place if you encounter something like that. It's the same kind of as if you were searching for something on the screen that the EMUE couldn't find. It would give you an error and said web element can't be found. So same process holds true here. You'll get an error message if you don't find a match.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. The next question from Jackie Jolly, what version is necessary for the new commands? And that is actually going to be our latest version that's available on our website. That's 5.0.1091 and beyond. The next question that came up is, are you releasing a new smart names file for 4.2.200? The answer is yes. That will be out in the near future. I don't believe we have a date just yet, but probably within the next several weeks here. Next question from Scott Smolin. Will Edge support and IE11 support require different versions of EMUE, or will EMUE support both browsers? And Kelly, I believe you touched on that a little earlier. Did you want to take that question?
Yeah. When we do support Edge, I mean, you obviously have to have a new version of EMUE at that point, so there's no support built in for it now. And the timeline for Microsoft support for Internet Explorer is pretty far out there. I mean, we're talking years probably. So I don't know how soon we'll be compatible with Edge. And as long as Microsoft supports it, Soaring Financials will work in it. And when they stop supporting it, then it'll go away and everybody will have to be on Edge at that point. But it will require, when we get it working with Edge, we will have to require a new version of EMUE in order to make that work. And the question, I guess, is if you can use the same EMUE version to work with Internet Explorer versus Edge. We hadn't really designed it out yet, but I would assume that we would. You wouldn't have to have we wouldn't have a different EMUE build just for Internet Explorer or Edge, because there'll probably be some things that are non-Saurian sites that we interact with that are really not affected by this. So we'll still want to maintain support for Internet Explorer in the same application.
All right, excellent, Kelly. I think that's it. So next to notice is where you can find some support. You can find it on our website at databoundhealthcare.com/support. You can also find it on our forum, community.databoundhealthcare.com, or you can give us a call at 1-877-DBS-EMUE. So thank you everyone for joining us today. To answer your questions about replay, the replay will be available on our website. If you navigate up to community and then training, from our training page, there is actually an EMUE ACE webinars page where all this content will be available. Thank you, everyone. It's been great having you on the call. Hopefully you got a lot out of today, and we look forward to seeing you next time on our next webinar.